What happens when a country music star who has lived through the darkest corners of life sits down with a journalist who thinks they can summarize his entire journey in a few carefully worded questions? You're about to find out, because what started as a standard CBS Sunday Morning interview turned into one of the most explosive moments in recent television history. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about interview walk-offs. Are they justified or just dramatic? Now let's dive in. The interview began like most others. Jelly Roll walked onto the set with that familiar presence, the kind that fills a room before a single word is spoken. He settled into his chair across from the host, a veteran journalist known for asking pointed questions that often made guests uncomfortable. The cameras were rolling, the lights were set, and America was watching. The host opened with what seemed like a softball. So Jelly Roll, your story is remarkable. From addiction and incarceration to sold-out arenas and chart-topping success. How do you make sense of that transformation? Jelly Roll leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. You know, I think the word transformation gets thrown around a lot when people talk about me, he said, but I don't know if I've transformed as much as I've just become more honest about who I always was underneath all that pain. The host nodded, scribbling something on a notepad. That's interesting, because a lot of people would argue that your past, the drugs, the crime, the time you spent behind bars, that those things define a certain kind of person. And now, you're being held up as this inspiration, this role model. Do you ever worry about the message that sends? The question hung in the air for a moment. Jelly Roll's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. What kind of message do you think it sends? He asked, his tone still measured but with an edge creeping in. The host didn't miss a beat. Well, some might say it romanticizes a criminal lifestyle. That kids might look at you and think, well, if Jelly Roll did all that and still made it, maybe consequences don't really matter. Jelly Roll sat forward now, his hands clasped together. Let me be real clear about something, he said. I have never, not once, romanticized what I went through. I've been open about my mistakes because I want people to understand that pain is real, that addiction is real, and that you can come out the other side. But if you think I'm up on stage telling kids to go sell drugs or catch charges, then you haven't been paying attention. The host raised a hand slightly, as if to calm the situation. I'm not saying that's what you're doing intentionally, but perception matters. You've built a brand around being the outlaw who made good. Doesn't that come with a responsibility to acknowledge that not everyone gets a second chance like you did? Jelly Roll's eyes narrowed. A brand? You think this is a brand to me? He let out a short, humorless laugh. Man, this is my life. These aren't marketing tactics. These are scars. And yeah, not everyone gets a second chance. You're right about that. I've lost friends who didn't make it out. I've got people I grew up with who are still locked up or 6 feet under. So when I talk about my story, I'm talking about survival, not some carefully constructed image. The host seemed to sense the tension rising but pressed on anyway. But you've profited from that story, haven't you? The albums, the tours, the interviews like this one. At what point does sharing your journey cross the line into exploitation of your own trauma? Jelly Roll stared at the host for a long moment, and you could feel the shift in the room. The air got heavier. Exploitation, he repeated slowly. You think I'm exploiting myself? The host maintained eye contact. I'm asking if you've considered that perspective. Jelly Roll shook his head, a bitter smile crossing his face. You know what's wild to me? I come on here, open and honest, talking about the worst parts of my life, trying to connect with people who are going through their own hell, and you're sitting here questioning my motives like I'm running some kind of scam. The host leaned in slightly. I'm simply doing my job, which is to ask the questions that viewers might be thinking. Jelly Roll's voice rose just a notch. Nah, see, there's a difference between asking tough questions and trying to paint someone into a corner. You want me to feel bad about the fact that my music resonates with people? You want me to apologize for turning my pain into something that might help somebody else not make the same mistakes I did? The host remained calm, which only seemed to fuel the fire. I want you to acknowledge the complexity of your position. You're a public figure now, with influence. That comes with scrutiny. Jelly Roll stood up suddenly, the movement sharp enough to startle the crew. You know what? He said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. I've sat through a lot of interviews. I've answered a lot of questions. Some fair, some not. But I'm not going to sit here and let you twist my story into something it's not. The host looked up at him, surprise finally breaking through that professional facade. We're in the middle of an interview. Jelly Roll was already unhooking his microphone. Yeah, and now we're at the end of it. The host tried to recover. Jelly Roll, I think you're misunderstanding. I'm not attacking you. Jelly Roll paused, the mic pack in his hand. No, I understand perfectly. You invited me here with one version of this conversation in mind, and now you're upset because I'm not playing along. You want me to be ashamed of where I came from or guilty about where I am now, but I'm neither of those things. I'm proud of how far I've come, and I'm not going to let anybody make me feel different about that. The camera crew exchanged glances, unsure whether to keep filming. The host stood now too, trying to regain control of the situation. This is what we do here. we have difficult conversations. If you can't handle that, then maybe you're not as comfortable with your past as you claim to be." That line landed like a punch, and Jelly Roll stopped in his tracks. He turned back slowly, his expression unreadable. "You think I'm not comfortable with my past?" He let out a long breath. "Lady, I've spent years in therapy working through my past. I've apologized to people I hurt. I've made amends where I could. I've looked in the mirror and faced things about myself that would break most people. So don't you dare stand there and question my comfort level with who I used to be." The host crossed her arms. "Then why are you running from this conversation?" Jelly Roll pointed at her, his frustration finally boiling over. "Because this isn't a conversation, this is a setup. You're not interested in understanding my journey, you're interested in getting a headline, and I'm not going to give you that satisfaction." The silence that followed was deafening. The host's expression hardened, and she took a step closer to where Jelly Roll stood. "A headline? Is that really what you think this is about?" Jelly Roll didn't back down. "What else would it be? You've been poking at me since we started, trying to get me to say something you can clip and put in a promo. Former convict loses his cool on national television. That's what you're going for, right?" The host shook her head. "You're being paranoid. I'm asking legitimate questions about your influence and your responsibility as someone in the public eye. These are things that need to be addressed." Jelly Roll laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Legitimate questions. Okay, let me ask you something then. Have you ever struggled with addiction? Have you ever been so low that you didn't think you'd see another day? Have you ever had to rebuild your entire life from nothing?" The host's composure wavered slightly. "This interview isn't about me." "Exactly," Jelly Roll said, his voice sharp. "It's not about you. But you're sitting here judging my life like you have any idea what it took to get where I am. You want to talk about responsibility. I take responsibility every single day. I talk to kids in detention centers. I fund programs for addiction recovery. I show up for people who need to know that change is possible. What do you do besides sit in this chair and interrogate people?" The host's eyes flashed with anger now. "I give people a platform to tell their stories, and I hold them accountable when necessary. That's my job." Jelly Roll threw his hands up. "Accountable for what? For surviving? For making something of myself? You act like I owe the world an apology for not staying in the gutter where people like you probably think I belong." The host's voice rose for the first time. "That is completely unfair, and you know it. I never said anything about where you belong. I'm simply questioning whether you've fully grappled with the implications of your platform." Jelly Roll stepped closer to her, his voice dropping lower but somehow more intense. "I've grappled with more than you could ever imagine, and I don't need someone who's never walked a day in my shoes to tell me how I should feel about my own life." The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. A producer off camera made a move, like they might intervene, but the host waved them off. She wasn't done. "You keep talking about your struggles, your pain, your journey," she said, "but what about the people you hurt along the way? The families affected by the drugs you sold, the communities impacted by the crimes you committed. When do we talk about them?" Jelly Roll's face went pale, then flushed red. "You think I don't think about them? You think I don't carry that with me every single day? I can't undo what I did. I can't go back and make different choices. All I can do is try to be better now and help other people avoid the path I took. But apparently, that's not good enough for you." The host pressed on, relentless now. "It's not about good enough, it's about honesty. Real honesty, not the sanitized version you give in your songs or your carefully managed public appearances." Jelly Roll's voice was shaking now, whether from anger or emotion. It was hard to tell. "Sanitized. You think what I put in my music is sanitized. I talk about wanting to die. I talk about hating myself. I talk about the nights I spent in a cell wondering if I'd ever be anything more than a statistic. That's not sanitized. That's raw. That's real." The host tilted her head. "But it's also profitable. That's the part you keep dancing around. Your pain has made you wealthy. Your past has made you famous. How do you reconcile that?" Jelly Roll was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer but somehow more dangerous. "You really want to know how I reconcile it? I think about the kid who comes up to me after a show, crying, telling me my music saved their life. I think about the letters I get from people in prison who say my story gave them hope. I think about the parents who thank me for helping their children feel less alone. That's how I reconcile it. Because yeah, I've made money from my music, but I've also made a difference. And I'd rather be someone who turned their mess into a message than someone who sits on the sidelines throwing stones at people trying to do better." The host wasn't backing down. "That's a nice sentiment. But it doesn't address the fundamental question of whether profiting from trauma, yours or anyone else's, is ethical." Jelly Roll stared at her in disbelief. "Profiting from trauma. Artists have been making art from pain since the beginning of time. Blues, country, hip-hop, rock. It's all rooted in struggle and hardship. Are you going to call out every musician who's ever written a sad song? Every author who's written about hard times? Or is it just me because I actually lived what I'm singing about?" The host opened her mouth to respond, but Jelly Roll kept going. "No. I'll tell you what this is really about. You're uncomfortable with the fact that someone like me, Someone who came from where I came from is sitting across from you as an equal. You can't wrap your head around the idea that a convicted felon could have something valuable to say, so you dress it up as concern about ethics and responsibility, but really, you just don't think I deserve to be here. The accusation hung in the air, and for the first time, the host seemed genuinely taken aback. That is absolutely not true. Jelly Roll shook his head. Then prove it. Stop trying to tear me down and actually listen to what I'm saying. I'm not perfect. I never claimed to be, but I'm trying, every single day, to be a force for good in this world. And if that's not enough for you, then I don't know what else to tell you. The host took a breath, seeming to recalibrate. Let's try this differently. Your music speaks to a lot of people who feel marginalized, forgotten, left behind by society. That's powerful. But don't you think there's a danger in becoming so identified with that struggle that you can't see past it? That maybe you're keeping people stuck in victimhood rather than empowering them to rise above it? Jelly Roll's jaw clenched. Victimhood. You think that's what I'm promoting? The host held up a hand. I'm asking if it's possible that your message, while well-intentioned, might inadvertently reinforce the very cycles you're trying to break. Jelly Roll was incredulous now. How does telling people they're not alone, that they can survive, that they can change, how does that keep them stuck? The host leaned against the desk. Because sometimes comfort can become complacency. If people feel too understood, too validated in their pain, they might not push themselves to actually change their circumstances. Jelly Roll's eyes widened. That is the most out-of-touch thing I've heard in a long time. You think people are comfortable in their addiction, in their poverty, in their trauma. They're not sitting around feeling validated and choosing to stay there. They're fighting every day just to survive. And sometimes the only thing that keeps them going is knowing someone else made it through. The host pursed her lips. I'm not discounting that, I'm simply suggesting that there's a balance between empathy and enabling. Jelly Roll threw his hands up again. Enabling? Now I'm enabling people by being honest about my life. The host's voice was firm. I'm saying that with great influence comes great responsibility. And I'm not sure you've fully considered all the ways your story might be interpreted or misinterpreted. Jelly Roll took a step back, shaking his head in frustration. You know what? I've considered it plenty. I've thought about it, prayed about it, talked to professionals about it, and at the end of the day, I'd rather risk someone misunderstanding my message than stay silent and let people suffer alone thinking there's no way out. That's my choice, and I'm at peace with it. The host studied him for a long moment, then shifted tactics once more. Let me ask you this, and I want you to really think about it. If you could go back and change your past, erase the crimes, the addiction, the time in prison, would you? Jelly Roll frowned. What kind of question is that? The host leaned forward. It's a simple question. If you had the power to rewrite your history, to have grown up differently, to have made better choices from the start, would you take that opportunity? Jelly Roll was silent, clearly wrestling with the question. The host continued, I ask, because if the answer is yes, then doesn't that undermine everything you've been saying? And if the answer is no, then aren't you essentially saying you're glad those things happened? Which seems problematic given the harm that was caused. Jelly Roll's expression darkened. You're trying to trap me again. The host shook her head. I'm trying to understand your perspective. Because from where I'm sitting, you can't have it both ways. You can't say your past was terrible and traumatic while also building your entire identity around it. At some point, you have to choose. Are you a victim of your circumstances, or are you someone who takes full ownership of their choices? Jelly Roll's voice was tight when he responded. I'm both. I'm a product of my environment and I'm responsible for my actions. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. The host raised an eyebrow. Aren't they though? Because it seems like whenever it's convenient, you lean into the victim narrative. And when that doesn't serve you, you pivot to the redemption story. That's what I mean by calculated. Calculated, Jelly Roll repeated, his anger rising again. You keep using that word like everything I do is some chess move, like I'm sitting around strategizing how to manipulate people. The host remained calm. I'm saying that you're a public figure with a team, with handlers, with people who help craft your image. That's not an insult, that's just reality. But it does mean that the version of you we see is curated, which makes it fair game to question. Jelly Roll laughed bitterly. You want to see the uncurated version? Here it is. I'm tired. I'm tired of people like you trying to find holes in my story. I'm tired of having to justify my existence to people who've never walked through fire. I'm tired of being treated like I need to earn the right to be heard. I've paid my debt to society. I've done my time. I've changed my life. And I'm helping people. What more do you want from me? The host's voice was steady. I want authenticity. Real authenticity, not the performance of it. Jelly Roll stared at her in disbelief. A performance. Everything I do is a performance to you. The host gestured around the studio. This is a performance. This interview, your tour, your social media presence, it's all performance. That doesn't make it fake necessarily, but it does make it constructed. And constructed things can be deconstructed. That's what journalism does. Jelly Roll shook his head slowly. No, what journalism is supposed to do is tell the truth. What you're doing is trying to create a story that fits your narrative. You came into this wanting me to be a fraud, and now you're doing everything you can to make that happen. The host's composure cracked just slightly. I came into this wanting to have an honest conversation with someone whose story has captivated millions of people. If you're feeling defensive, maybe that says more about you than it does about my questions. Jelly Roll took a deep breath, visibly trying to control himself. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe I am defensive, because I've spent my whole life being judged, being written off, being told I'm not good enough, or that I don't deserve a second chance. And just when I think I've finally proven myself, someone like you comes along to remind me that no matter what I do, there's always going to be someone waiting to tear me down. The host softened slightly. I'm not trying to tear you down, but I am trying to push you to go deeper than the talking points. Talking points, Jelly Roll said quietly, almost to himself. You think my life is talking points? The host sighed. I think you've told your story so many times that it's become polished. And polish, while appealing, can also obscure the truth. Jelly Roll looked at her with something like pity now. The truth is messy and complicated and sometimes contradictory. The truth is that I'm grateful for where I am, but I'm haunted by how I got here. The truth is that I'm proud of my growth, but I'm ashamed of my past. The truth is that I love making music, but I hate that my pain is what makes it resonate. Is that unpolished enough for you? The host seemed to consider this. It's a start, but here's what I still don't understand. If you're truly at peace with your journey, why does criticism affect you so much? Why are you so defensive when someone asks hard questions? Jelly Roll's laugh was hollow. At peace? Who said I was at peace? The host blinked. You did, multiple times. In interviews, in songs, you talk about finding peace and healing. Jelly Roll shook his head. I said I'm working towards peace. I said I'm trying to heal. That doesn't mean I'm finished. That doesn't mean I've got it all figured out. And yeah, criticism affects me because I'm human, because I care, because despite everything, I still want people to see the good in me, not just the worst parts of my past. The host leaned back. But don't you see? That need for approval, that desire to be seen as good, that's what makes your story feel less than genuine sometimes. It feels like you're seeking validation rather than just being yourself. Jelly Roll was incredulous. So now I'm not supposed to care what people think. I'm supposed to just exist in a vacuum where criticism doesn't hurt and support doesn't matter. The host shrugged. I'm saying that maybe the defensiveness comes from the fact that deep down, you're still not sure you deserve the platform you have. And that uncertainty makes you vulnerable to questions like mine. Jelly Roll stood completely still for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but intense. You know what the saddest part of this whole conversation is? I actually came here thinking we were going to have a real discussion. I thought maybe, for once, someone would be interested in the actual work I'm doing. The lives being changed, the hope being restored. But instead, you spent this entire time trying to prove that I'm a fraud, that I'm not worthy, that my success is somehow illegitimate. The host started to protest, but Jelly Roll kept going. And the really messed up part is that you probably think you're doing some kind of service, like you're protecting the public from a con artist or something. But all you're really doing is showing how little you understand about redemption, about growth, about what it actually takes to change your life. You want me to be ashamed. You want me to apologize for succeeding. You want me to admit that I'm somehow exploiting my own trauma. But I won't do that, because it's not true. My music comes from a real place. My message comes from a real place. And if you can't see that, then this conversation was pointless from the start. The host's voice was cold now. So you're giving up, walking away because the conversation got uncomfortable. Jelly Roll grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. No, I'm walking away because this stopped being a conversation a long time ago. This is an interrogation. This is you trying to break me down so you can have your moment. And I'm not going to give you that. The host stood up straighter. You do realize how this looks, don't you? You do understand that walking out only reinforces the idea that you can't handle scrutiny. Jelly Roll paused at the edge of the set. You know what? I don't care how it looks. I spent too many years worrying about how things look, trying to be what other people wanted me to be. And I'm done with that. If people want to judge me for having boundaries, for refusing to be disrespected, then let them judge. I know who I am, and I know what I stand for. That's enough. The host called after him. This is going to air. You know, people are going to see this. Jelly Roll turned back one last time. Good. Let them see it. Let them see what happens when you try to have an honest conversation and someone twists it into something ugly. Let them see that even when you've changed your life, there are people who will never let you forget where you came from. Let them see all of it. Because I'm not hiding anymore. Not from my past, and not from people like you who think they can use it against me. And with that, he walked off the set, leaving the host standing there. The camera is still rolling, capturing the aftermath of what had become one of the most controversial interviews in recent memory. The silence that filled the studio was deafening, broken only by the quiet murmur of the crew, unsure of what had just happened or what would come next. So there you have it, an interview that started as a standard conversation and ended with one of music's biggest stars walking off set. What do you think? Was Jelly Roll right to leave, or should he have stayed and finished the interview? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story like this. What would you have done in his position? Let me know in the comments.